Trigger warning. There is potentially damaging subjects in this video such as sexual assault, murder, self-harm, or harm of a child. If this is not something for you, that's okay. We'll see you in another video.
What up, guys? It's Kat, and today I wanted to talk about Jack the Ripper. 137 years ago, in 1888, the streets of London were filled with terror as a shadow of death stalked the unsuspecting people of Whitechapel. A full understanding of the Ripper's MO was not established until several years ago. The murderer and his victim stood facing each other when the victim's hands were occupied and she was then defenseless. The Ripper seized the woman by their throats and strangled them until they were unconscious, if not dead. The Ripper then lowered his victims to the ground, their heads to his left. No bruising on the back of the heads shows that he lowered the bodies to the ground rather than throwing or letting them fall. The Whitechapel murderer then cut the throats when the women were on the ground. Splatter stains showed that the blood pooled beside or under the neck and head of the victim rather than the front, which is where the blood would flow if they had been standing up. This method also prevented the killer from being bloodstained. By reaching over from the victim's right side to cut the left side of her throat, the blood flow would have been directed away from him, which would have reduced the amount of blood he would have been exposed to. If the victim was already dead before their throats were cut, then the blood spilt would not have been very much. The Ripper then made his other mutilations, still from the victim's right side, or possibly while straddling over the body at or near the feet. In the opinion of most of the surgeons who examined the bodies, most believe that the killer had some degree of anatomical knowledge to do what he did. In one case, he removed a kidney from the front rather than from the side and did not damage any of the surrounding organs while doing so. In the other case, he removed the sexual organs with one clean stroke of the knife. Given the time and circumstances of the crimes, outside, near pitch black, and also trying to keep an eye on anybody showing up, that would call for extremely tight time constraints. The Ripper almost certainly would have had some experience in using the knife. Attacks ascribed to Jack the Ripper typically involved women working as prostitutes who lived and worked in the slums of the East End of London. Rumors that the murderers were connected intensified in September and October of 1888, and numerous letters were received by media outlets and Scotland Yard from individuals saying that they were the murderer. The name Jack the Ripper originated in the Dear Boss letter, written by an individual claiming to be the murderer, which was dismissed in the press. The letter is widely believed to have been a hoax and may have been written by journalists to heighten interest in the story and increase their newspaper circulation. The From Hell letter, received by George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, came with half of a preserved human kidney, supposedly taken from one of the victims. The public came increasingly to believe in the existence of a single serial killer known as Jack the Ripper, mainly because of both the extraordinarily brutal nature of the murders and media coverage of the crimes, and the legend solidified. A police investigation into a series of 11 brutal murders committed in Whitechapel in 1888 and 1891 was unable to connect all the killings conclusively to the murders of 1888. 5 victims, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, are known as the Canonical Five, and their murders between August 31st and November 9th in 1888 are often considered the most likely to be linked. These crimes became a combination of historical research, folklore, and pseudo-history, capturing public imagination to the present day. Jack the Ripper has been one of those mysteries that would likely never be solved. Until recently, there has been DNA evidence pointing to a suspect. Apparently, he was a suspect back in the day, too. I think I'll just read you guys the article that I found that was talking about this in some detail. The site that this article is on is called Now to Love. I'll be sure to link it in the description below. Descendants of the victims of Jack the Ripper are demanding a fresh inquest into the historic murders after new evidence seemingly confirms the identity of the 19th century serial killer. The 3 times great-granddaughter of one of the Ripper's victims has issued an emotional plea for the UK coroner to formally unmask the murderer, who has been identified through DNA as a man named Aaron Kosminski. Okay. You know, I didn't know what I expected the Ripper's name to be. I guess I just wasn't expecting Aaron. Having the real person legally named in a court, which can consider all the evidence, would be a form of justice for the victims, says Karen Miller. Her ancestor was Catherine Eddowes, who was brutally killed by the Ripper on September 30th, 1888. We have got the proof. Now we need this inquest to legally name the killer. It would mean a lot to me, my family, and a lot of people to finally have this crime solved. Not much is known about Kosminski. I hope I'm saying it right. We do know that he was a Polish barber who immigrated to East London in the early 1800s, or 1880s. He is also believed to have lived near the Whitechapel locations where the Ripper's victims were killed. Despite being a suspect and his name being mentioned in police memos at the time of the murders, Kosminski was never charged. In 1891, Kosminski threatened his sister with a knife and was institutionalized at the Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum. He died aged 53 in 1919 in another psychiatric hospital, and it's thought that he suffered from schizophrenia. Over the past 130 years, there have been theories about the killer's identity. Some suggested he could be a doctor, a member of the royal family, or a costume maker to Queen Victoria. Someone even pointed the finger at Louise Carroll, or Carroll. I'm definitely not saying that right. Author of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Then 17 years ago, a bloody scarf thought to have been worn by Catherine when she died was purchased by historical crime enthusiast Russell Edwards. He hoped it would help finally uncover the Ripper's true identity. He found a genetic scientist willing to examine the tattered silk scarf and analyze it under laboratory conditions. It was eventually confirmed that the shawls still contained traces of DNA from Jack the Ripper and Catherine. With the help of genealogists, Russell found a relative of Kosminski who was willing to offer up her own DNA for comparison. When that came back with a positive match, Russell was convinced he'd solved the case. It's very difficult to put into words the elation I felt when I saw that 100% match. Russell tells Women's Day, my bad. This brings closure, and it's a form of justice for the descendants. 2 years ago, the UK's then Attorney General refused permission for an application to the High Court for an inquest into the case. But in correspondence with the new legal team hired by Russell, East London coroner Nadia has recently suggested she would be willing to hold an inquest. It's never been possible to establish exactly how many murders the Ripper was responsible for in Whitechapel area. However, it's generally agreed that as well as Catherine, 4 other women were killed by him, the canonical 5. All were subjected to horrific and violent attacks. While police and newspapers at the time claimed they were sex workers, only 2 were. I did not know that. The others were homeless and attacked while sleeping on the street. Yeah, Whitechapel during this time frame was struggling. It was a struggled area. That's why when it's made this big deal about them being sex workers, it's so common during that time period. It was literally so common for that to be the case for women because they didn't have any other source of income. The killer terrorized London's East End over a 4-month period in 1888. During this time, police and local press received hundreds of letters from an author claiming to be the Ripper. Public interest and lurid details about the case kept the Ripper on the front pages. It marked the first time true crime reached a wide audience. In 2015, the Jack the Ripper Museum opened in East London for the relatives of the victims. Being able to name their killer is their only kind of justice. He can't be prosecuted because he's dead, but this is the closest thing that they can do, says Russell. This man committed atrocities towards their ancestors, and we all know it's him. Now we want the courts to say, yes, you're right. Whoever it was that gave the DNA for Kopolsky, no, not Kopolsky, what was his name? Kosminski. My bad, I said the wrong name. Whoever was the relative that gave up their DNA to test if it was him, you a real one. That's for sure. Tell me what you guys thought about this video in the comment section below, and if there's anything else you specifically would like to hear a video on, make sure you comment that below too. Whenever you guys request something, I make a list and I try to make sure that those are the next videos that come out. I forgot that the storage had got full, so it cut me off. Bye. Say bye, Monique. I'll be sure to